So one of the cool things about being an automotive technician is being able to give back. And today I got my mother coming down and we're gonna put a starter in her car. They're actually towing the vehicle down. I'm gonna put a starter in her car. And I'm gonna walk you step by step through the process of putting in a starter on a Toyota Matrix. So stay tuned for that. So my mother drives a 2008 Toyota Matrix with the 1.8 liter engine. So we're gonna change out that starter and I'm gonna walk you step by step through that process. So the first thing you're going to want to do is disconnect the negative battery cable. And once you get it disconnected, you're going to tuck it off to the side. So the starter on this vehicle is slightly tucked underneath the intake manifold here. We don't have to remove it or anything. We just need to work around it. So we're going to disconnect the positive lead going to the starter and also unplug the control wire, or what they call the signal wire, going to the solenoid on the starter here. So the first thing we're going to do is pull this rubber boot back here, and we're going to take the little 12 millimeter nut off on the inside there. And then right underneath it will be the control wire. We'll push the tab and pull that little electrical connector off. To remove the nut holding the power wire onto the starter, I'm using a flex head ratchet here. It's a 1/4 inch drive with a 12 millimeter socket. There's just enough room to get down here and crack this free. Usually once you loosen it up a little bit, you should be able to reach your hand around there and just spin it off by hand, especially if you live here in Southern California where the bolts and fasteners come off really easy. If you live in the Rust Belt, you may have to ratchet that all the way off. So as you can see, it's a little bit of a tight squeeze, but you can do it. You can get your hand down here. So once you get the nut removed, you can go ahead and pull the cable off the starter. Then you can unplug the electrical connector was right underneath that by squeezing the tab and pulling it off. If you see here, I'm wiggling the wire here and you can see everything. So once you get it unplugged, the next step is going to be to unbolt the bottom bolt. Now I was able to get to that bolt with just a standard wrench and crack it free. There's just enough room between the bolt and the fan here, and you just get it on there and crack it free. And we're using on these, you can spin them out by hand once you loosen it up a couple threads. Also, if you're finding it difficult to get to it this way, you can go from underneath the vehicle looking up towards the starter and use a ratchet, and that might be a little easier for you. So the wrench or the socket that you're going to need to do this is a 14 millimeter. To get that starter bolt going, I would flip the wrench over, rotate it a little bit, flip the wrench back over, and it helps get it at different angles to get the wrench on there so you can loosen up the fastener. So like I said, once I got it loose, a couple threads, I was able to just stick my hand down here and spin the bolt out by hand. So once you get the bottom bolt, then we're going to move on to the top bolt. And the top bolt comes from a different angle. So if you look down here, it comes from the driver's side towards the passenger side. To loosen that up, I used a flex head 3/8 drive stubby ratchet with the 14 millimeter socket. And I was able to get that on there and crack it loose with the even with the short ratchet. So as you're spinning the top bolt out, you may want to reach down there and support the nose of the starter because it starts dipping and it kind of makes the bolt bind as you're taking it out. So as you can see with my left hand, I'm holding the nose of the starter, maybe even wiggling it up and down just a little bit. And with my right hand, I'm spinning the bolt out. So once you get the starter unbolted, there's not going to be enough room to pull it out towards the fan and the intake here. So what you need to do is drop it down below and out the bottom of the car. Sorry for my head and big ears getting in the way. So what I'm doing here is just angling it down and pushing it down out towards the bottom. And once you get it to go out, I just let it drop on the ground. Then you can reach under and retrieve it. So to go back in, it's best that you use floor jacks and jack stands and at least jack up the driver's side and just a couple inches so you can crawl underneath the vehicle and feed the starter back up from the bottom. So I'm laying on my back and pushing the starter up from the bottom, and as I get it up into this cavity, I'll turn it towards the transmission and make sure the solenoid is facing upwards and stab it into the nose of it into the bell housing of the transmission. Then I'll go back up top. So once I'm back up top with the car still jacked up in the air, I'm holding the nose cone of the starter and I'm reaching in there and starting the 2 bolts. So as I'm doing this, I'm slightly wiggling the starter up, down, left to right to kind of line up the bolt holes. And then I start both of these by hand. So in my case, I started the bottom bolt first. I got it started a couple threads and threaded in as far as I could. That'll stabilize the starter and make it easier to start the top bolt. Now with the bottom bolt started and run in pretty far, I was able to just start the top bolt by reaching in here like this and starting it. I also had to hold the nose of the starter and wiggle it up and down and kind of twist it left and right to get that bolt to start and get it going. Once I got the top and the bottom bolt started, then I went ahead and tightened up the top bolt first. I'm using the shorty ratchet here to do this. I'm running it in till it's snug, and then I'll go about a quarter turn more. So once it's tight, about a quarter turn more, and that should be tight enough, and then I'll switch over to the bottom and tighten up the bottom bolt. Now with that same flex head ratchet, I went ahead and ran the bottom bolt in further and snugged it up with the flex head ratchet. Then I switched back over to the wrench. I just find it easier to get the wrench on it than using the flex head ratchet and tighten the bottom bolt. Now that the starter is tight, now you can put the electrical connectors on. So put the main power feed or battery cable onto the starter and start the 12mm nut, run it into it snug, and you're going to put that rubber boot back on. After that, you can take the electrical connector for the solenoid and plug that back in. When you go to tighten up the main power feed or the battery cable feed going to the starter, you don't want to tighten it up too tight. It's got a brass fitting on it, and if you tighten it up too tight, it will snap it off and you'll have to replace the starter again. So just run it into it snug, and about a quarter turn more. You kind of do it by feel. Now you can take your negative battery cable and go ahead and reinstall it on the battery and tighten it up. After that, you can remove the jack and jack stands, and then we're going to start the vehicle up and test the starter out. I recommend that you start the vehicle several times in a row, making sure that the starter works. Also, if you want to, you can put an amp clamp around the battery cable and see how many amps it's drawing and make sure it's not drawing too many amps. So I will link up all the parts and tools that I use in this video in the description. That way, if you need to pick any of those up, you can find those there. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, encourage you to subscribe, invite you to head over to the howtoautomotive.com website for more valuable videos like this. Thank you again for watching.